Hey, if you're just getting into Spanish guitar style improvising and music theory, in this video I want to show you how with just 3 chords and one scale shape in one position, we can get into starting to improvise and maybe even accidentally write your own song. Okay, if you're already good at improvising and you know all your music theory and all that stuff, this video might not be for you. On the other hand, you might pick up some ideas that you can use in your soloing. But here what I want to do is just get the basics down of a common chord progression and a scale shape that we can use all over the neck. And there's a problem in minor keys in Latin, Spanish music that we have to deal with coming up. And at the end of this video, I'll have a loop for you so you can practice your improvising over these chords. Okay, the chords that we're going to play is what we would call in a minor key a 1-4-5 chord progression. It's what I played at the beginning here. It's A minor, then we have a D minor chord, and then E or E7. Let's make it E7 because we don't have to have as many fingers down. And in fact, that makes it more tense, which we'll talk about later. And then we're coming back to A minor. Now, it doesn't matter what rhythm you use. I was doing a rumba. Maybe you could do a waltz or any rhythm that you want. But what we want to do at first here is just play 2 measures per chord, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, A minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not hard. 1, 2, 3, 4, then E or E7, and then back to A minor. Okay, easy enough. Now what scale do we play over this? Now A minor is the relative minor of C major, and if you know your C major scale, that's all natural notes. There's C major, and if we play all of our natural notes in the first position, we get this scale shape. So if you've already studied sight reading in a method book or something, you will have already played the scale. Sometimes they call it the natural scale because it's all the natural notes in the first position. But this is consistent with, or is, the notes of C major, which is also all the notes of the key of A minor. All that really means is that instead of a C major chord being our tonic or our home bass chord, A minor is the chord that we keep coming back to and that things want to resolve to. So what we can call this scale is the A minor scale, right? But we don't need to call it the A minor scale because we can play it anywhere. Let's play it on the 7th fret real quick. Now it's the E minor scale because the note where A was on the 5th string down here now is E, and we can play the same progression in other keys. For now we're going to stick to A minor, but here's what the scale looks like when it's not an open scale. Weirdly, sometimes scales are easier to see when they're not open. The advantage to playing open meaning that the scale has gone off the neck. So these open strings make it easier for us sometimes because we can pull off to open strings as I did in the beginning of this video. Here we don't really have that open string advantage, but it's easier to see. So I think you should practice the scale all over the neck. It's just a picture that moves around. Play it wherever you can. This would be the key of C minor or E flat major. And there's other names we can give the same scale pattern. Some people call it the C4 major scale if you're into the caged system, because the root of the major scale, or let's go down here to the first position, the root of the major scale appears as a C form, right? Now, if you're a piano player or you don't play a stringed instrument, this makes no sense to you. There's not 5 ways to play the same thing like there is on the guitar. That's a good and bad thing about the guitar. I could play the same scale here, C major, but we might call that, if we're calling things by their caged name, the E form major scale, or some people call these patterns pattern 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Doesn't really matter. And the more names we can give the same shape, that just means the more we understand it and the more we're able to understand it from the different angles and vantage points. So what we could also call, finally, this scale would be the A form, the A minor form minor scale, because the root of the minor scale occurs here. If I were to play that chord, it would resemble an A minor chord. Okay? I don't really call it any of those things unless I'm teaching it or talking about it. We just want to have an understanding of where we can put the scale and how it works together with the chords. So our challenge here is to play 1 measure of the chord and 1 measure of anything that you want from the scale. For now, any note will do, and then go on to the next chord and keep doing the same thing. So what's going to happen is A minor, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're just noodling around, but you only have a measure to do it. So this is helping us work on what we would call phrasing. So this is great because instead of just sitting around and noodling around over that scale mindlessly, we have a deadline. We only have 1 measure, so that means we need to wrap it up before the measure is over and then get to that next chord. And that might inform the notes that we play, and that's going to sound more intelligible and more coherent if we do it this way. So do this exercise with a metronome, definitely. So we're playing A minor, 1, 2, 3, 4. Any notes you want, then D minor. Doesn't matter for now. E7. E7, and we're back to A minor. Now, we have the advantage here, and this is why we're doing it in the key we're doing it. The root of each of these chords is an open string, so that actually gives us a little breathing room to play the first beat of the next measure. We can just play the root of the chord, and that gives us more time to set up. And in a rumba, you might do that anyway. We might play a rumba playing the root of the chord first, right? So what I mean is 1, 2, 3, 4. We got our notes, any notes. Get your thumb to the root note of the next chord, and we have more time to set the chord up. We don't have to frantically get there. And that's the advantage of open strings, and that's why the key of A minor is such a common guitar key. So once you do this exercise for a while, just kind of playing random notes, we want to start seeing how these chords go together with the scale. So if we're visualizing the scale pattern, we want to see how A minor fits right into it. We're not violating any of the dots. And D minor fits right into there. But what about E7? Do you notice that there's a note that's different there? And that gets us to a problem that we have in minor keys, especially in Spanish or Latin music, and that is the harmonic minor scale. So in an E7 chord, all the G's are sharp. We have the root, major third, perfect fifth, and a flat 7. So we have a note here that's violating our scale, and we have to account for that when we're improvising. So that throws a monkey wrench into our soloing a lot, but that's a good thing. It's going to sound more appropriate and more correct if we take all of our G notes and raise them up to G sharp, and that is what we would call the harmonic minor scale. What's happening here is that this chord should have been E minor if we're just going to deal with the notes that are in the scale, and that's called diatonic chords. Diatonic means we're only using notes from the scale. So it should have been A minor, D minor, E minor. That would be our 5 chord, lowercase, Roman numeral 5. And then we're back. But it just doesn't have the push that E7 does. If you think of the major scale, we were in the key of A major. We would have an E chord. All the G's are sharp in the key of A. E7 or E wants to resolve to A. And that major 7th, G sharp, called a leading tone, really wants to resolve up a half step to, in this case, A. So the minor scale, the natural minor scale, well, we could also call it the Aeolian mode, it doesn't have that in there, but we can make it have it. So we're like taking a major scale idea and putting it into the minor scale. That's what we call the harmonic minor scale. And the weird thing is, it just doesn't manifest itself over every chord. We don't need to play any G sharp notes over A minor or D minor. And if we did, it might sound weird. Over E7 though, we probably should, because if we don't, we get this sound, which is like E7 sharp 9, very bluesy chord. You'd use that in a bossa nova or something, but most of the time it's going to sound like you made a mistake. Okay, so we have to take all of our G notes, G here, open G, and this high G, and bring them up 1 fret, sharp them, when E7 is playing. Or you could just avoid G notes altogether. So let's see how this changes our scale pattern. We have, there's my G sharp. This is the A harmonic minor scale. There's that G sharp again. Up on top. Now it really starts to sound Spanish, and there's that sound that makes it what we would call Latin or whatever. So now let's try doing our 1 measure of the chord, 1 measure of the scale, and keeping in mind the harmonic minor scale when the E chord rolls around. A minor, D minor, E7, there was the G sharp in there. Now I'm just playing notes randomly, and that's what you should do. It's really a great practice. Make it different every time. And it doesn't have to be complicated. If you're having trouble with this, just do half notes. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it doesn't matter what the notes are as long as it's in the scale that we're talking about. But we can add notes that aren't in the scale once you get more comfortable with this. For example, if you're going to the C note, let's say that A minor is coming up and I want to land on the C. We want to see how the chord fits into the scale, right? And I'm coming from this note, I can go. You can always go chromatically, and that note is not in the scale. It's a non-diatonic note, but it still sounds great. And that's a whole other can of worms, adding chromaticism into your soloing. Right now, let's just stick to the scale. All right, what I want to do now, just for a moment, is a couple of times do this to a metronome so that you can play with me. So I'm going to play 1 measure of the chord, and we're going to have a blank measure. The metronome's going, we only have 4 beats, and you're going to play whatever you can from the scale, and then try to be on the chord with me on the next measure. Okay, we're at 100 beats per minute here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Improvise, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we start again. We're still on A minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, one more time. So if you're having trouble with that and you're new to improvising or new to the scale, I remember when I first learned this, it's one thing to know the scale and play it up and down, but when somebody says improvise, that word is very intimidating. All we're doing is just playing randomly. When my teacher first asked me to do that years and years and years ago, it felt like he was saying, take all your clothes off and run down the street. I mean, it was embarrassing to play something that was not written on the page, but this is such a great exercise for your musicality, your timing, music theory, and your technique. What I want to do now is play a loop for you of these chords, so you don't have to worry about strumming. You're just trying to navigate the scale pattern. We're just noodling around. It might not sound very musical. Just make sure you're playing the notes that are in the scale, and watch out for that E7 chord. Remember, all of the G natural notes become G sharp, and this is the best way to get into this idea of strumming the chord and improvising, strumming the chord, improvising. And then eventually you're going to play a little phrase that you like, and you might remember it, or you could record it, and this is how songs are born. So now it's time for you to practice improvising over these chords. So that's it for now. Be sure to download the worksheet for this below, and also check out my free nylon string guitar workshop where I show you the 3 most essential techniques for the right hand.